The Balkan Peninsula is a region with 12 countries that have just one thing in common, and that's that they all hate each other. For decades, most of these countries were a big part of a federation called Yugoslavia, which had a socialist system very similar to that of the Soviet Union. After the fall of communism, the Yugoslavian estate broke apart, and all the regions separated from each other in the most violent way possible. If you're about my age or slightly older, you might remember the terrible Balkan Wars, a showcase of the worst part of the human condition. And all of this happened just a few kilometers away from Italy and from Greece. So while the rest of Europe enjoyed a comfortable and peaceful existence, this region's inhabitants were killing each other. Since then, the Balkans have been one of Europe's poorest regions. Some people call it the Bermuda Triangle of economics because when someone invests here, their money mysteriously disappears.
Traveling to a country like Albania is a bit like traveling 50 years in the past. Other countries like Serbia are growing fairly fast lately, but they are still miles away from being able to join the European Union. And Greece, which is the best boy in the classroom, is bankrupt and has an unemployment rate of 21%.
In other words, this doesn't look like a good country for doing business, right? Well, dear viewer, China thinks it is.
China is pouring billions of pounds worth of investment into Greece and other Balkan countries to create a new Silk Road from the Mediterranean into the heart of the European Union.
We are talking about almost $20 billion. This is the same cost as hosting the Olympic Games, and it's all in a region where nobody else seems to invest a penny. China has bought a harbor and is now building brand new railroads that will connect the Balkans with Budapest in Hungary, and that might end up in Germany. But not only that, the Chinese government is paving the way for private investment. Can you imagine Chinese factories on the outskirts of Belgrade, an AliExpress logistics center in the middle of Athens? Well, this might be a reality sooner than you might expect. For a better understanding, if we look at it relative to their population, China is showing a bigger interest in Greece or Serbia than it is in Germany. So now the question is, why is China so interested in the Balkans? Isn't this a poor, corrupt, and business-unfriendly region? I mean, what is China trying to achieve here? Well, today we are going to answer all of these questions, but as usual before we do, let's take a look back at the history.
A country for sale.
In the year 2010, Greece started their budget cuts. The whole country was bankrupt, and the European Union agreed to bail them out with money from its wealthiest members. But in exchange, the Greek government was supposed to control their spending. Since then, Greece has gone through all kinds of political and financial crises. Unemployment simply doesn't stop growing, it's now at more than 20%, and poverty is on the rise too. For a better understanding, Greek public debt is almost twice that of their entire gross domestic product. And on top of all of this, Greece seems to be allergic to business. They have rampant corruption, red tape, and all kinds of laws that have created a country with almost no major companies. Brussels demanded that the government of Alexis Tsipras make reforms and sell their state-owned companies. But there was a big problem here. Being in the situation that they were, nobody wanted to buy the Greek government's property, so they simply had to drop their prices to rock bottom. In other words, Greece was, and still is, in a desperate situation. And now guess who can smell desperation from miles and miles away? Yep, that would be China.
China's Costco acquires 51% stake in Greece's Piraeus port.
With this deal, China was killing two birds with one stone. On the one hand, one of their companies was buying one of the main ports in the Mediterranean Sea. On the other, the government of Xi Jinping, with his commitment to investing $3 billion more in the country, was buying a political ally inside the EU. And yes, I know what you're now thinking. The Greek president, Alexis Tsipras, the European left rock star, the man who would never sell his principles to an evil rich guy no matter how much money was put on the table? Yeah, we mean that guy.
Greece blocks EU's criticism at UN of China's human rights record. Greece has vetoed a European Union condemnation of China's human rights record at the UN, infuriating diplomats and rights organizations, who said the move undermined the EU's position as a defender of human rights.
But wait just a minute, because this is not only about politics here. Let's take a look at it from an economic perspective. Now, a Chinese company controls one of the biggest ports in Europe. This means Chinese businesses will find it easier than ever to load their products into one of the wealthiest markets on the planet, Europe. But still, there's a little problem here. From the Piraeus port to Berlin, we have more than 2,300 kilometers of distance. And on the way, we have poor countries with poor roads and poor railways. But hold on just a second here, because China has already thought of this. Do you remember the One Belt, One Road project? This is a brand new Silk Road that Xi Jinping wants to create. This is a network of infrastructure that is meant to connect the entire world. And in Europe, this Silk Road will go through the Balkans.
Belgrade Budapest railway construction starts.
At the same time, Chinese consulting companies are working to renovate the railroads between Greece and Macedonia. The goal is to be able to have one shipment landing in Piraeus and crossing the whole Balkan peninsula at 160 kilometers an hour. And all of this is cheaper to build here than in Italy. I mean, think about it. The Balkans have cheap land and cheap salaries, and their governments are welcoming this Chinese money with open arms.
As we said at the beginning, the Balkans still feel a bit like the aftermath of the wars from the 90s. In a city like Belgrade, you can still see the ruins from the NATO bombings in 1999. A country like Montenegro doesn't even have a railroad that connects it with Bosnia or Croatia, despite sharing a border. And don't forget that, except for Greece and Croatia, none of these countries are EU members.
This means that they hardly get any Brussels money to rebuild, so these Chinese loans are simply like dollars from heaven.
When we speak about this with European countries, they say, why China? Because they have the money, to be honest. Zorana Z. Mijalović, Serbian Minister of Transportation.
But hold on just a second here, because this is not the end of the story. What if China wants to go even further?
Chinese factories in Europe?
We all know it. China started growing thanks to the foreign companies that set up in these special economic zones. But the truth is, the real appeal of China during the 90s was the lower wages. However, they've now changed. Take a look at this chart. Today, the average salary in a city like Shanghai is almost the same as that in Greece and almost double that of the Serbian salary. This means for a Chinese company, Serbia is something close to what Shenzhen used to be for an American. There's also the fact that Serbian education is relatively good and they're close to Germany. In summary, cheap labor, well-educated population, and close to one of the world's most appealing markets. This, dear viewer, is an unexplored paradise.
China's Hebei signs agreement to buy Serbian steel plant.
Of course, this news is from 2016 and we still don't have that many examples, but there are enough cases to show a clear trend. Chinese companies want to start manufacturing things in Europe, and the Balkans are the perfect place to do that. Most specifically, they're looking at Serbia. This explains why this year Xi Jinping himself paid a visit to Belgrade, or why Huawei has already invested a fortune to improve telecommunications in the country. Last year, that's 2017, the Bank of China opened their first Serbian offices. So in a way, we could say that the relationship between these two countries, well, it really couldn't be any better right now. But I can probably guess what you're thinking right now. I mean, very rarely at VisualPolitik do we tell you that corruption is a friend of foreign investment. And when it comes to corruption, Serbia certainly starts to look less like a paradise. But make no mistake, Chinese companies are experts in dealing with this. In fact, Chinese businessmen are quite comfortable in hostile environments. They have demonstrated this when they built those textile factories in Ethiopia. And let's be honest here, China itself isn't exactly a haven of transparency and democracy either. Meanwhile, as soon as investment came to the Balkans, the region's fondness for Europe started going down. In 2012, 70% of Serbs wanted to join the European Union. Some people were even willing to change their alphabet to do that. As you probably know, Serbian is a Slavic language and it's written in Cyrillic characters. Some intellectuals wanted to change it to a Latin alphabet the same way the Croatians did. But now, well, this love of Europe, it's dropped to 35%. At the end of the day, with money flowing into China, well, who really wants Brussels funding?
In past presidential elections, none of the main candidates talked about joining the European Union. Nevertheless, nobody in Brussels seemed to be too worried about this. As we said, only China has been capable of finding business opportunities in this part of the world. The rest of Europe still sees this as a political and economic desert.
The same happens in many parts of Africa where nobody dared to invest. All of a sudden, Beijing money came in, and now some of these countries are growing like there's no tomorrow. So the question is now, will we see an awakening in the Balkans the same way we've seen it in some African countries? I mean, could Greece, Serbia, and perhaps even Bosnia become a brand new industrial cluster for Chinese companies? Well, let us know what you think in the comments section below. And meanwhile, if you want to know more about why Australia fears China, please do click on this video. And also don't forget to visit the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that are not mine. Also, don't forget, brand new videos every Monday and Thursday, so hit that subscribe button below. And as always, thank you for watching.
And if you want to learn more about politics and hear even more of my lovely voice, you can join us at Reconsider Media. We have a podcast at reconsidermedia.com/podcast. See you there.